What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video. I'm recovering from a cold, so pardon my voice. Today we're not going to be playing on my usual save file. We're going to be playing on this other one called Tests. And this is where I test out various rockets and other things. So I wanted to show you some space planes today, because I've taken an interest in them. And I've named this one the Icarus Mark III, because this is like the third design that I've come up with. And it's a twin-engined spaceplane that unfortunately cannot get into orbit, and I don't know why. It has two Rapier engines, and it comes equipped with RCS rockets and some parachutes, a battery, and some solar panels for the electric charge. And there's also a small monopropellant tank. Now, some of this extra stuff may not be necessary for a craft this small, but I put them on in this design just in case. As you can see, this plane's thrust to mass ratio is just ridiculous. I can go at a 40-degree angle and still accelerate really quickly. So yeah, I mean it's got what is it? The Mark II cockpit or whatever. It is the new cockpit that they recently changed the model for. So basically, Bob and Bill are piloting this thing. Jebediah would be here, but unfortunately I lost him in a previous test, so RIP. But this is just like a simulation, so this isn't real. It isn't reality. It's a different save file, so I'm not counting it. So I'm checking my air intake here to see how much air is getting through, because, you know, as you increase in altitude, the air gets thinner. But these Rapier engines, they switch over to non-atmospheric engines. So they're like jet engines, but they can they switch over into like a rocket engine mode. So that is very helpful when launching these space planes. So they're really nice, although they are quite expensive. And so if you're like playing this in career mode, I would not suggest using these until, you know, much later. So I'm continuing to climb. But I'm not accelerating anymore, and I'm actually slightly deaccelerating, which is kind of an issue. You need to be getting out of the atmosphere at a pretty high velocity so that you can get into orbit. And unfortunately, I have just like angled my plane wrong. The thing about space planes is that fuel conservation and angling that your angle of attack are very important. You really can't just go straight up or, you know, go completely horizontally. You have to find somewhere in between and continue to change your angle. So I unfortunately failed, and the reason why I did is because I went past my apoapsis. So basically I was going too slow, and eventually I just started to fall back to Kerbal, and that's the end of that. So I knew that I had done something wrong, so I decided to try to fly this plane again. Hopefully, and hopefully try to get into orbit. So this time I'll be going at a shallower angle at 30 degrees this time, and hopefully this will allow me to get up to a higher speed. So the main issue with space planes is that each plane is different, so you can't just like follow a basic formula or technique for example that you could do, which you kind of can do with rockets, where you change the angle at 5,000 meters and then you change it again to a certain angle at 10 kilometers. You can't really do that because of the aerodynamic properties of your spaceplane. Now, some people have said that with the new aerodynamic updates, with the new physics model updates, that it makes launching spaceplanes easier, but I have not found that to be the case. I still find difficulty launching them up, and my real goal is to get a spaceplane of my own design up into orbit. One that is not too small and is not that doesn't look ridiculous. But this is, I don't know, it's quite a challenge for me, and I've watched a video or two on how to launch these, but as I said before, it seems as though you need to have a different approach for different space planes, and some seem to be easier to launch than others. Like for example, there's a couple of stock space planes, and one of them is really easy to launch, and another is more difficult. It requires better fuel conservation and stuff like that. So what I did with the second launch after my first failure to get into orbit was kind of get up out of the atmosphere at a shallower angle, and then once I was out of the atmosphere, trying to angle my plane a little bit higher to increase my apoapsis, because you need that apoapsis to be more than 60 kilometers at least, I think, in order to get into orbit. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just trying to be very careful. I don't go full throttle because that's not really necessary. I also have learned that you don't want your apoapsis to get too far away from you. Otherwise, you won't be burning as efficiently. So what I'm trying to do is try to increase my apoapsis, but at the same time, making sure that it's not going too far away. I've been told that if it's like more than a minute away, that's not usually a good sign. So I decided to burn prograde to try to get to my apoapsis, but it's continuing to run away from me. But I was thinking that shouldn't be too much of a problem, and so I just continue to try to increase my apoapsis while also increasing my radius of my orbital path, because as you can see, even now I'm going to fall back down onto Kerbal, and I think at this point I've run out of fuel. So, oh wait, no, not yet. Okay, I should tell you that I'm recording this audio at a later time. It's not that I'm recording my voice live. So yeah, at that point I do run out of fuel, and you can see me waving around the mouse in frustration. So I don't even know if this plane, even if you flight it as perfectly as you could with its characteristics, I don't even know if it could get into orbit. I really don't know, because it just doesn't seem like it has enough fuel. And since, each different space plane works differently and how they operate, it's really hard to figure out the best way, the most fuel efficient way to get a spaceplane into orbit. And so that's just something that I've struggled with. And the only reason why I spend this much time on this sort of subject is because, I don't know, it just interests me. The whole idea of space planes where it can take off from a runway, on the ground, in the atmosphere, and just fly all the way up out of the atmosphere and get into orbit. It seems like a very interesting concept. And the problem is just that it doesn't, with the current technology, it just doesn't seem that efficient. What we need is, in the real world, is something like a Rapier engine, where you have an engine that can work both efficiently in an atmosphere, but also out in space, where there is no oxygen, there's no oxidizer. So that's the main issue. So, I've angled my plane, but the nose of my plane, retrograde, because I've actually done this before, where I just had the nose of the plane pointing prograde, and the cockpit burned up and blew up. So the plane was really refusing to be pointed retrograde, so I had to do some maneuvering. Pretty sure in real life this would have probably made the plane break into a million pieces because it's going so quickly and burning through the atmosphere. But the fact that my plane was in an awkward position, and its profile acted as a air brake somewhat. So it slowed me down, which is a good thing, as I'm falling back to Kerbal. But anyway, that is an issue that I've been thinking about, because I'd really like to build a spaceplane that can get in orbit, or even go to the moon or something. But as it stands now, I don't really know of any way to do that, other than building a huge plane with tons of fuel and ridiculous engines. And I'm sure the difficulties that I'm struggling with are, in fact, real life difficulties, and that's why we haven't seen space planes yet, and instead we've seen rockets. And even the space shuttle, which in itself wasn't that too radical. I mean, it came in the atmosphere as like a plane, that is true. But even the space shuttle, it turned out not to be as cost efficient as originally thought. And so that's why even today we still use conventional rockets with conventional rocket fuel to get into space. It just, with the current technology, just seems the most efficient way to get into space. So it's a challenge in the real world that you can experience virtually, I guess, in this game. And I don't know. It's just something that has poked my interest, because I think a spaceplane would be really cool. I mean, it would be just like any transatlantic flight, but you could orbit the Earth. You see, I crashed into the water at like 12 meters per second. I'd flied this plane several times before, one in which pretty much the same thing happened, where I ran out of fuel and I crashed into the water. This time, there was a big explosion and my plane burst apart into several pieces, which was a bit of a surprise for me. But at least the crew survived, and you can see there, I recovered the crew at least. I'm sure I've wasted millions of dollars by destroying the plane. I just want to show you a couple of other designs that I've been messing around with. This is the Icarus Mark III-B, and the only difference is that I've taken a lot of the extra stuff off, like the solar panels, the battery, and the extra monopropellant tank, because the 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 cockpit themselves have monopropellant and electric charge. This is the Icarus Mark IV, which is a later design, but it turned out not to work at all. I actually have a Mark V as well, which I'll show you now. The Mark IVs and Vs, you can see, are much bigger, and the idea was that I would have these, tanks on the side of the fuselage, and then attach the wings to those tanks. And then those fuselage sections with the wings on them would be jettisoned once I got into space, because you don't need those big wings, and those wings and tanks are just a bunch of extra added weight. But anyway, that's all I really wanted to show you in this video. So I will in the next Kerbal Space Battleground video, I will return to our regular space program. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.